Currently, you see on the screen the question itself, and I'll be solving it, hoping you're going to follow it and have a clue how to save time during the exam. So what I suggest, here in the task, you are required to compile two statements, income statement and statement of financial position. Both are worth 11 marks. In order to save time, I do not recommend you to make adjustments in the format of double entry, although I would share some of them on the screen, I would write them down, but then delete. I recommend to start with a compilation of these two statements. So please make sure that you have two blank pages before your eyes and start name one page as a balance sheet and the other income statement. So I wrote down balance sheet of Olecon with the proper date and proper currency, which we're going to use in our task. And then I would divide the screen or the page into two parts. The left side would be dedicated to the assets of the company. The right side are liabilities and equity. So please be sure that you have a lot of blank space or spare space around the section, each section. Equity goes here, equity. And on the second page, we're going to start our profit and loss statement. Profit and loss statement of Olecon. So please be sure that you give a proper name of the statement, as I did. Give a proper name of a company, as I did. The period you are stating, if we speak about profit and loss statement, you have to state the period. If we speak about balance sheet, you have to state the date, the exact date you're compiling balance sheet on. So we are compiling profit and loss statement for the year, which has ended on the 31st of October 2024. And all amounts are in rubles. So please state the currency. And profit and loss statement should start with sales or revenue. They're synonymous. Then you're going to have cost of goods sold, calculated using the formula opening stock plus purchases less closing stock. And when you deduct cost of sales out of sales, you can calculate gross profit. I would leave some space, again, some lines, some free lines, in order to fill it in if needed. If you're going to have here some returns or maybe discounts or maybe carriage in, which should be added to cost of sales. So please leave enough blank space to fill in. Gross profit. Now, as you can see, I'm just drawing the format of profit and loss statement. I do not use any amount from the task. I'm just setting up the format, setting up the table or the structure of the profit and loss statement in order to fill it in later. Then we can add other income and deduct other expenses. For other expenses, please leave enough space. And then I suggest you to go to the very bottom of the page and state net profit, because net profit or profit after tax is the very last line in any income statement you are compiling. Before you would receive net profit, you would deduct tax expense. But before you deduct tax expense, it's going to be profit before tax. Interest should be deducted before PBT, and the line which should appear above interest reads profit before interest and tax or operating profit. This space, which is left here, would be filled in with lines for other expenses. So let's start compilation of our two statements. We can divide assets between non-current assets and current assets. Again, setting up the formal assets. I've mistaken the letters assets here. Liabilities also should be divided between long-term liabilities and short-term liabilities. And the equity is just equity, that's all. So let's fill in these two structures, I would say. We have to consider trial balance given, first of all. And what I suggest is just to rewrite each and every line you see here from trial balance given to the statements we've just started to compile. And then we're going to account for adjustments, additional information you can see here. So let's do so. So first of all, just to rewrite the given information, almost 0 points you would receive for that, but you still need to perform it. So share capital goes to balance sheet equity section. Car garage accumulated depreciation goes to balance sheet assets. New Geely, again, as an asset, as a non-current asset, goes to balance sheet assets, and so on. So what I would do, I would just rewrite all the given amounts into the proper sections of either P&L or balance sheet. Share capital in amount of how much? I can see 2,000,007. Oh, it's awful. But you've paid to suffer, as I like to say. So share capital goes here. Share cap 2,721,376. In non-current assets, we're going to have car, garage, and Geely, motor vehicle. I would remind you that non-current assets should be split between historical cost, accumulated depreciation, and net book value. Historical cost for car garage is given in the trial balance, and it is 205,000 rubles. Accumulated depreciation given is 12,300, but I'm not closing brackets because we're going to adjust for depreciation for sure. Geely, historical cost is 3.5 million. Accumulated depreciation 70,000. Not a lot. Provision for doubtful debt is the next line in the given trial balance. This line would be linked to the accounts receivable. So please find the line which reads accounts receivable or trade receivables in your given trial balance and fill the respective section of balance sheet. Here we have trade receivables. This would be an amount for trade receivables and trade payables, which goes to the creditors section. So trade receivables should be stated together with provision for doubtful debt. It's quite a complicated thing, I do know. So trade receivables less provision. Provision for depreciation is an amount which decreases trade receivables to the net book value in accordance with prudence concept. So here we would have trade receivables which are given in amount of 25,000 and provision for doubtful debts given 4.5. I do not close the brackets again because I do know that this amount would be adjusted. Then we have wages and salaries. Wages and salaries with debit balance is an expense which should appear in other expenses section of profit and loss statement. Wage and salaries. Again, I'm gonna write here down 5,905 in brackets. Bad debts already written off. Also expense, bad debt written off. 656. Deposit at T-Bank Deposit is, of course, an asset. We can see debit balance here, so we have to fill in the respective section of balance sheet. I would claim that it should be stated in non-current assets. So deposit. But in solution, I can see that it was stated in current assets. Since we don't have any information about the length of a deposit, you can choose either current assets or non-current assets. Let's follow the solution. I would move it to the current assets as it was given in solution. But again, it's not a mistake to state the deposit in T-Bank as non-current asset because we have no information about the length of deposit, the time length, 125,000. The next line in trial balance reads purchases and sales. Purchases and sales lines should appear in income statement. So sales with the credit balance 567,890 seconds would appear in a sales line. Debit balance of purchases should appear in our special place for calculating the cost of sales. So we would fill in the line purchases with the amount given, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the total amount of purchases for the period. The next line in trial balance reads other expenses, 75,000. Other expenses, 75,000. Then we can see CHEP driver's remuneration. Remuneration is like a salary. It's like a premium paid to the driver. So driver's remuneration would appear in other expenses section in a total amount. Then we can see driver insurance. Again, it would be an expense for sure. Insurance would appear here, 15,000. When you see something with a debit balance, be sure it would be either expense or an asset. And insurance, I think it's an expense, so I would put it in income statement. Dividends received. Dividends received is a type of other income a company could receive. Dividend received. You know, I'm Russian, that is why we can hear Russian accent here. So 31,000 should be added as other income. Retained earnings with credit balance, of course, goes to equity section of balance sheet. You do know that retained earnings is the profit accumulated for the periods, for the whole life of the company. Retained earnings at the beginning of the year was 450,000 rubles. It would appear in equity section. Then we can see oil and antifreeze expenses. The word expense gives us a clue that it should be added to other expenses. Oil expense, 17,800. Again, audit fee. Audit fee, of course, is an expense. We pay to auditors for them to issue an opinion about our financial statements. Debentures. Debentures with a credit balance. Of course, it's a long-term liability and would appear in liabilities section of our balance sheet. Debenture is a loan, 20%, 300,000 would be stated here. And since we see the percentage, I would bet that we're going to have adjustment on interest expense. So please wait just to start. So inventories of Yolochki absorbers. At the beginning of the year, you can see, I will show in the trial balance, the year we have to compile the statement for ends at the 31st of October. So it means at the 1st November 2023, it has just started. So this is the opening stock of inventories, opening stock of goods. That is why it should be used not in balance sheet as an asset, but in our income statement as an opening stock in order to calculate cost of goods sold for the period 94,360. Trade payables from the next line should appear in our short-term liabilities of trade payables, 12,000. And the last line here, bank balance. Please pay your attention on this line. You can see that bank has a credit balance. That means that the company has overdrawn bank account. That is why bank balance should appear on the liability side of our balance sheet, not in assets. That is why in liability section, short-term liabilities, of course, we're gonna state bank overdraft in total amount of 55,000. So we have completed to rewriting the given information. We have used each and every line out of this list, and each line was used, not line, but amount, I would claim, was used once, either in profit and loss statement or in balance sheet. So you have just rewrite. The first thing you have to do is just to rewrite the given information. And then what I suggest to change the color of your pen. So my suggestion is to take pens of two colors, black and blue, let's say, or light blue and dark blue onto exam. And then you can change the color. I would change to green and start considering each and every line of additional information for adjusting entries. Not to spend time on completing accounting entries because they are not graded. They are not graded for this task. You are required to compile these two statements. So let's start with the first piece of information. Tax on the profit for the year is estimated at 46 and something. What should we do? We have to make an entry in our books stating that expense for the year on tax, debit expense, tax expense, debit expense tax, credit tax, payable, tax liability, unpaid still, in total amount of 46 and something should appear in our books. It's not essential, it's not required to write down this entry. I suggest just to correct the statements you have. In short-term liabilities, you're gonna add line tax payable with an amount 46,882. The given figures here, yes. And you have to add tax expense line. We even have this line, tax expense. We have to fill it with an amount 46,882. It would be an adjustment required. Let's consider the next point. Driver's insurance include 5,000 for the half year ended on 31st of January. What does it mean? It means that when insurance was paid, this is the timeline, our financial year ends here, 31st of October. So here we have October, here we have September, here we have August, and on the right we have November, December, January. So it means that the company has paid insurance for 6 months. And this is the period covered. And the total insurance cost us 5,000 rubles. So we have to split this amount between our year we are compiling financial statements for and the next year. When it was paid, Lenочka, bookkeeper, who is not clever enough, who is not experienced enough, she make an entry, debit, insurance, expense, credit, cash, 5,000. But actually, only 2,500 should be stated as expense for the current year. So we have to exclude 2,500 from expense in order not to overstate our expenses. Accounting entry, adjusting entry should be debit, prepaid, prepayment, insurance, credit, insurance, expense on 2,500. in order to decrease expense for the current year and increase prepaid asset. Again, you are not required to state this accounting entry. You need just to correct your financial statement. So let's add prepaid insurance. Prepaid insurance in our current assets an amount of 2.5, and let's decrease the insurance we have in our records by the same amount, 2.5. It's gonna give us 12,500 thousand rubles as an insurance expense. This amount should appear as insurance expense in profit and loss statement at the end of the year. So we have finished with this point. Let's consider the next one. Electricity bill for the quarter to 31st December hasn't been accounted for. That means, again, let's consider our timeline for electricity. Let me clear the screen. Let me clear the screen for electricity purposes now. So again, we have to consider the timeline for electricity. This is the year, and I mean financial year. And we speak about the bill, the liability, which should be accounted for the months still unpaid of electricity usage. And the electricity bill, which would cover 3 months up to the 31st of December, these 3 months, would include 6,600 of electricity expense. So we have to assume that electricity is spent on a smooth basis. So we just split this account for 3 months, considering that only 2,200 should refer to electricity expense for the month, for the year which has just ended. And we have to add this 2.2 thousand of electricity to our electricity, oil and something antifreeze expense. So we have to increase, let me do so, debit, oil and something, and electricity expense, I just don't remember the line, electricity expense, 2,200, credit, what should be credited? We haven't paid for this electricity yet, so we have to credit accruals. We have to create new account, credit accruals, начисления in Russian, accruals in the same amount. Again, we can just correct our statements. In liabilities, we're gonna have accrual electricity, 2,200. In expenses, we have to add 2,200 to our oil expense and something and something. So we're gonna have here exactly 20,000, by the way, plus 2,200, which would give us 20,000 of expense. What I insist on, you have to calculate the final amount of your expense. So it's not the equation should appear in income statement or balance sheet. You have to state the final amount of expense on insurance, on electricity, or whatever you calculate. Because the grader, me, should see that you have calculated it and included an correct amount for the final result. So it's impossible to see the financial statements, the real financial statements with calculations, but not the final answer in it. So please do so. So we have added 2,200 to the liability, and we have increased electricity expense by the same amount. Number 4, the provision for doubtful debts is to be adjusted 5% of the trade receivables at the end of the year. So let's do so. The trade receivables at the end of the year are given in amount of 25,000. 25,000. Давайте, let me clear this screen again. 25,000. That means that the provision, wait, 25,000. That means that the provision should be 1,250. Currently, we have the provision which equals to 4,500. That means that we have to decrease provision for doubtful debt. So it means that our expectations on bad debts to be written off is lower, which is good for our company. So we have to consider it like income. An entry would be debit, decrease in provision on doubtful debts, credit, provision on doubtful debts itself. I abbreviate a little bit. But we have to debit this. We have to debit these two accounts by the delta between these two, the provision required and the provision which was in our records. The delta would be 3,250. So an entry should be made in this amount, 3,250. 3,250. That means that in our income statement, in other incomes, we're gonna see decrease in provision on doubtful debts in amount of 3,250. So it should be added to our incomes. And we have to correct the provision stated in our balance sheet to the required amount. So let's continue. So we have finished with bad debts provision. Now we have to calculate depreciation for non-current assets. It's quite the simple thing you have to perform. I hope you'll do it. Garages are depreciated on a straight line basis over 10 years. So it means we have to consider the 1/10 of the historical cost, which is 205,000. Depreciation expense would be 2,500. When we speak about motor vehicles, we have to consider reducing balance depreciation. That means that we have to take the initial cost, which is stated in our records, which is 3.5 million. 3.5 million. We have to deduct already accounted for depreciation, accumulated depreciation, and then to multiply it by 2%. That would give us 68,600 of depreciation expense for the current year. So these two amounts should appear as depreciation expense in our financial statements, in our income statement to be precise. So depreciation expense would be the sum of these two. This is 89,100. So in income statement, we're gonna have additional line depreciation expense for both non-current assets in total amount of 89,100. And in our balance sheet, we have just one. We have to add here 12. 20, yes, 20 and a half, that would lead to 172,200 of non-book value for garage, and we have to add here 68,600, and the net book value for Geely, the only one Geely, would be 3,361,400 rubles. Okay. Now we can sum up non-current assets. Non-current assets, the total sum. You can calculate it by yourself, by the way. I believe you have to do at least something here. So we have accounted for depreciation expense and we have adjusted net book values. 6, inventory, closing inventory. Closing inventory was 150,000, but it contains some stock with a decreased value. So we have to adjust the closing stock valuation. choosing the lowest between historical cost and net realizable value. So let's do so. So 150,000 is the total amount, but we have to consider, we have to adjust for historical cost because the future selling price is obviously lower. So we have totally exclude the historical cost valuation, and we have to include these items at the future price to sell less repacking, which should be performed. So the total closing stock valuation, would be 7,3. So here we would have 7,350. And the total adjustment is to be performed at 750. So the closing stock would be adjusted. The adjusted amount of closing stock would be 149,250. And this amount should appear 2 times in our statements. This amount should appear debit as closing stock here, 149,250, and credit as closing stock in income statement for the purposes of calculation of cost of sales. Wait, I'm sorry, have mistaken the amount, 250. Great. So we have included the closing stock here. And the very last line, if I'm not mistaken, yes, the debenture interest. The debenture interest is outstanding at the end of the year. That means that the company hasn't paid any interest on debentures. The company has non-current liability as a 10% or 20%, I don't remember, 20% debentures. It is stated that it's 20% debentures, but somehow I see, no, it's quite correct. It's only the name, or not the name, the specification of debentures, and the answer is differ. It's not 10% at 20%. So 20% debentures means that we have taken loan of 3,000 rubles, and we have to pay 20% per annum. That would lead to 60% of interest expense. Since we don't have any line which reads interest expense or paid interest in our trial balance, that means that we have to adjust our financial statements by the interest expense of 60,000, which goes to income statement, credit interest payable, which goes to current liability section. Again, you are not required to write down these entries. You need just to include interest payable of 60,000 in current section of liabilities, and interest expense. We have the line for this here. We have the line 60,000 in our financial statements. And then that was the last adjustment. And then you have to calculate the final gross profit, final figures for your statements. So cost of goods sold would be, we have to consider these 3 lines. Cost of goods sold would be 68,566, which should be deducted out of sales, which would lead to gross profit of 499,324 rubles. Then we have to add other income. We have 2 lines. We have to deduct all other expenses, and operating profit, if you do so, operating profit would be 293,524. Then you deduct interest expense. That would lead to profit before tax 233,524, and the final result, profit after tax, is 186,642. That would be final result of income statement. It's very important to calculate it because we would use this profit adding it to the retained earnings line in equity section. So if we add 186,642 to our equity section, I bet that all your finals would show balance. So if you sum up the total assets here, the total non-current assets, the total
current assets. Here, you can calculate total assets. I won't do that right now. Total assets. If you sum up short-term and long-term liabilities, you're going to have total liabilities here. And if you sum up share capital and retained earnings at the end of the year, you're going to have total equity. And total equity plus total liabilities should lead to total assets. So please calculate totals for your balance sheet and make sure that this balance is in balance. Now I'm finishing my Zoom, and I hope that records are okay. I wish you good luck on exam.